My name is Zoraya Tapia, and I have been the advocacy director here at NDN, but primarily focusing efforts on Hispanic programs. I'm pleased to announce that I will be changing positions shortly, but I have been very proud to be a part of NDN and its Latin America Policy Initiative. For those of you who don't know or are not familiar with NDN's background, NDN began and is formally known as the New Democrat Network, where it began as a political action committee and shifted over to becoming a think tank, a 501c3 and 501c4 a few years ago, under essentially one premise. Our president and founder, Simon Rosenberg, who is very sorry he couldn't be here today. He is in Mexico as we speak, Mexico City, as part of an official delegation of the U.S. Department of State. But he sends his regards and thanks the ambassador for joining us, and sends, of course, Ambassador Patriota his regards. He began NDN under the premise that to be successful in 21st century politics, there are essentially three very important trends we must pay close attention to. One is our changing demography as a nation, the changing face of America. Two is the new ways in which we communicate, including social networking tools and this new technology that must be incorporated into politics as well as policy. And lastly, globalization and how this new world economy is a new reality that we have to work with, particularly major partners such as Brazil. So the Latin America Policy Initiative began under the Hispanic Programs umbrella initially, under the premise that in order to better communicate with the changing demography of the U.S. and increasing number of Hispanics in this country, a large part of that improved communication will consist of having better relationships with the Hispanic and Latin urgent countries in the continent and with our region. And so we are very proud to have as a chairman of this initiative Nelson Cunningham, who needs no introduction, but in case most of you don't know, Nelson not only has been committed as a policy analyst and working in the area of Latin America, he is also personally tied to it. He grew up in the Latin America region and has lived in several countries in the continent, so we really appreciate his understanding and caring for the region and U.S. relationships with the various countries. So Nelson did, in this capacity, professionally serve as an advisor to President Clinton for Western Hemisphere affairs, and subsequently advised the Kerry campaign on international and Latin America policy, as well as the Obama campaign and transition team on foreign affairs. So we're very proud to have Nelson, and with that, I will turn it over to you, Nelson. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zoraya. Zoraya, thank you for that really warm welcome. It's been a real professional privilege for me to be able to work here with NDN and the terrific team that they have here, which I think does one thing better than any other organization in Washington, which is to make foreign policy relevant to domestic political interests here in the United States. And the work that we've been able to do together at NDN to make Latin American policy alive to Washington policymakers is the thing that I am most proud of. We're continuing today in our series of ambassadorial lunches and are very proud to have one of Washington's most distinguished diplomats, Antonio Patriota. You all know the great story of Brazil in recent years and recent decades. The rise of Brazil as one of the world's great powers, the economic growth of Brazil, their new reputation as a sports powerhouse. You all know about Rio 2016. You may not be aware that just 2 years before, they will also be hosting the World Cup, which actually has a larger worldwide audience than the Olympics do. So in 10 years' time or so, we're going to see the entire eyes of the world focusing on Brazil and on what may be called the decade of sport in Brazil. But what you may not know about Brazil, but you'll learn in a few minutes, is that pound for pound, they probably have the best foreign service in the world. Itamaraty is renowned for the professionalism of its diplomats. It has permitted Brazil, even when Brazil was not the rising power that it is today, it has permitted Brazil to exert an influence on world affairs that was significant. And sitting here to my right is one of Itamarachi's best products. Ambassador Patriota has served his country in China. He has served his country before the WTO. He has served his country before the United Nations. He has been here serving as ambassador for the last almost 3 years. And if one believes rumors in the newspapers in Brazil, he may soon be serving his country as deputy foreign minister, which would be a great loss to Washington, but a gain for Brasilia, and I think in the end, a gain for U.S.-Brazilian relations. You'll also learn that Ambassador Patriota speaks English far better and with less of an accent than I do. If you could put your hands together for Ambassador Antonio Patriota.
Okay. As I was saying, as a Carioca, I'm very proud that Rio has been chosen to host the 2016 Olympics, and before that, the 2014 World Soccer Cup. I might remind you that Carnival will go on a yearly basis, so, so there will be, you'll continue to have many excuses to visit Rio. But I think the main message I'd like to convey today is that Brazil's strong economic performance and what we may describe as its political and democratic maturity have created an entirely new context for Brazil's international affairs and international outreach, and also for Brazil-U.S. relations, I believe. Now, this is not to say that the relationship is not on a good standing, and I had the opportunity, even in my previous position as Undersecretary for Political Affairs, to follow Brazil-U.S. relations very closely. I believe that the two countries are experiencing a very positive moment in their relationship, very statesmanlike in the approach to common economic and political issues. But of course, more can be done, and certainly there is a desire on the part of Brazil to do more, and we are very encouraged by the development over the past few years, and now, of course, with President Obama in the White House, I think there's a natural affinity between the two leaders, President Lula and President Obama, of course, who have met frequently on the margins of important international events, recently at Pittsburgh, but also started off on their professional relationship on a very good footing with a meeting at the White House in March of this year. To give you a little bit of an update on the economic and political front, I think it's pretty much what you've been reading in the press. Brazil is one of the last countries to be affected by the world economic downturn, and in all likelihood will be one of the first to come out of this economic crisis. The results for the last quarter were very positive, with 1.9% growth, and the expectations for next year is resumption of growth at around 4.5%, 5%. Yesterday I was reading a declaration by Jim O'Neill, the Goldman Sachs expert who coined the BRICS term, and he seems to be even more enthusiastic. He believes Brazil can surpass the 5% growth target for 2010, which is a demonstration of great confidence in the prospects for the near term. Now, all of this has happened in a context of reduction of inequality, very significantly so, with tens of millions of Brazilians rising from the more extreme poverty categories into the middle classes. Today, it is calculated that 52 to 53% of the Brazilian population can be described as middle class population, which is quite impressive when you compare with figures for even 10 years ago. Employment has been soaring at quite an impressive rhythm, and for this year, it is expected that 1 million new jobs will be created. Now, that's quite extraordinary when you consider that for 2 quarters the economy was in a recession. but the latest figure is of something close to 700,000 new jobs having been created already for 2009. And one aspect of this economic and social development that I think has caught the attention here in the United States, and that also creates a sense of optimism in Brazil, is the story of energy self-sufficiency. Now, this, of course, being associated with two important developments. One, the investment in biofuels and ethanol, with a large fleet of flex fuel automobiles around the country, and a nationwide network for the distribution of ethanol. The other important development, of course, having been the discovery of oil of quite great depths, but this is what also ensures that this is very high quality oil offshore along the coast of Rio, São Paulo, and the state of Espírito Santo. For the first time in our history, in 2006, we became self-sufficient, and the outlook for the coming years and decades is one where we will be a net exporter of oil and energy. And if you compare Brazil, for example, with the other BRICS countries, Russia, India, China, we will be the only one in the BRICS who is simultaneously self-sufficient in energy, food production, and water. I think this provides a very strong sense of how we can start planning for sustained economic growth in the future. And when I say sustained, I should also say sustainable, because the environmental awareness is growing very rapidly in Brazil. There are ambitious new targets that are being talked about in terms of deforestation. Of course, deforestation, as you know, corresponding for the largest percentage of our CO2 emissions into the atmosphere. Otherwise, and again, I use often the BRICS as a comparison because it will give you a good indication. We have the cleanest energy matrix among the BRICS, or even among countries in Europe, and compared to the United States as well, with 43 to 45% of our energy needs being covered by renewable sources. The comparison with the OECD average would be, for example, 13 or 12%, more or less. So the challenge for Brazil, really on the environmental front, it has been deforestation, and this government has assumed a very ambitious goal. In fact, it's meeting at ministerial level through interagency groups right now during this week and these days in order to finalize its position for the Copenhagen summit later this year. I know that Presidents Obama and Lula spoke a few days ago. President Lula congratulating President Obama for the Nobel Peace Prize. And one of the topics that they did discuss was climate change and the need for the two countries to come to Copenhagen with strong and ambitious goals. Now, trade has also been on the upswing. When the Lula government started, Brazil used to export around 70 billion US worth of goods. Today, it exports 200 billion. And trade with the United States has grown quite considerably. Last year, we experienced a historic record of 53 billion trade US dollars in the two directions. And this has been very advantageous to the United States. Although we still have a small surplus, while our exports to the US in the past 6-7 years grew by 65%, imports from the US grew at around 170%. So a very important market for the US. And I think there are new mechanisms in place that reflect the growing importance that the US government and the private sector are giving to this relationship. I would mention, among others, the CEO Forum that has been meeting regularly since 2007 on a biannual basis, a group that brings together 10 important CEOs on each side with governmental involvement as well. There is a memorandum on biofuels that has also brought the two countries together in an effort to look at ways in which they can cooperate bilaterally, but also in third countries, especially vulnerable economies that are highly dependent on oil imports. And there's another mechanism that we have been, I'm very happy that I was involved in helping to bring it to creation, which is the Dialogue on Economic Partnership, a mechanism that brings together the Foreign Ministry in the Brazilian case and the State Department here in the US to look at economic challenges that can be confronted also through, let's say, a more political prism. So one area where we are trying to cooperate more closely with the United States, for example, is in bringing Haiti out of its predicament of chronic violence and institutional disruption, and making sure that the current effort led by the United Nations Stabilization Mission can be translated also in a more sustainable pattern of economic progress and social progress for Haitians. I'll mention very briefly that some of our outreach to the rest of the world has also been probably advantageous to U.S. companies and to U.S. economic interests, in particular the strong investment in South American integration, an effort that led to the creation of the Union of South American Nations in 2008, UNASUL, as it's known in Portuguese. And this group has already created a number of working groups and subcommittees that are dealing with matters such as defense, drug trafficking, infrastructure, etc. Many U.S. companies based in Brazil are taking advantage of the stronger economic ties that Brazil is developing with its immediate neighbors, and the fact that Brazil has a more industrialized economy has been important in this case, because many vehicles, electrical appliances, computers, a range of products are now being sold in increasing numbers to our immediate neighbors. Our outreach to Africa has also not gone unnoticed in the United States. We have several initiatives which range from efforts at improving health care in some of the Portuguese-speaking countries in Africa, such as São Tomé and Mozambique, or to improve institutional governance in Guinea-Bissau, among others. As I mentioned before, also biofuels is on the agenda, and we're looking at ways to improve or to create an ethanol industry in some of the countries where the possibilities for producing ethanol from sugarcane are the most encouraging, such as Senegal, for example. We've created, you were mentioning our foreign ministry. It's true, I think we have many reasons to be proud of the diplomatic tradition in Brazil. One of the features is that today 100% of Brazilian embassies around the world are headed by career diplomats, which is not a very common situation for diplomatic corps around the world. This in a context of a growing number of offices. In fact, if you count embassies and consulates, we have opened more than 50 new offices around the world in the past 7 years. Many of them are in Africa, some in the Middle East, some in the newer republics in Central Asia and Eastern Europe. We will be one of the first countries in the Americas to have a standing embassy in every single independent country in the Americas, and this includes many of the smaller Caribbean nations, also an area where Brazilians are starting to take increased interest. Let me just conclude by saying that we see extraordinary possibilities for developing closer relations with the U.S. under the Obama administration. There is great admiration in Brazil for many of the initiatives already taken, the stances that were outlined through speeches as the Prague speech on nonproliferation and disarmament, the Cairo speech in reaching out to the Islamic world, the fact that President Obama was the first U.S. president to host a Security Council meeting at summit level recently now, at the beginning of September, I think also is a good illustration of his commitment to multilateralism. Brazil also priding itself on a very long tradition of strong commitment to organizations such as the World Trade Organization, the United Nations, and others. So we are hopeful that very soon we will be able to welcome the U.S.'s new ambassador to Brazil, Assistant Secretary for the Americas, Tom Shannon, and to work energetically on this new agenda. So thank you very much for your attention.
Ambassador, if you'd prefer to stand there, please do, or sit here.
No, I'll continue standing. I sit a lot during the day.
Good, good. Well, if I could throw out the first question or two, and then we can open it to the audience, and I hope we can have a real conversation here. You noted the good relationship between President Obama and President Lula, which I think has been evident to all of those who have been following U.S.-Brazilian relations. President Obama reached out to President Lula when he heard that he was going to be in the United States, invited him to come to Washington. They met in March, as you indicated. They met on the margins of the G20 meetings that have occurred since then. President Obama has gone out of his way to be visibly, to show how visibly fond he is of President Lula. Clearly, the rapport that they've established is an early one and an important one. What can you tell us about plans for President Obama to travel to Brazil, and when might that occur, and what do you expect? How do you expect him to be received in Brazil?
Well, I think the expectation is that he will be received very warmly. You know, he has even joked around that he looks a little Brazilian and that he would go unnoticed in the streets of Copacabana or in other major Brazilian beaches. And we know that he's a beach lover. He grew up in Hawaii. He knows how to body surf, which is something we all learn in Brazil at a young age. So that will create a kind of automatic link. But looking at the planning for the next few months, and I did refer to Tom Shannon's confirmation, because that will be probably the first step in a series of visits that we are looking at here. And the series will be more or less like this. We are expecting Undersecretary Bill Burns, Undersecretary for Political Affairs at the State Department, to travel to Brazil in the coming months. That would lead the way for the Secretary of State to come, Secretary Hillary Clinton, who's also developed, I think, a very constructive working relationship with our own Minister, Celso Amorim. And perhaps at the end of the year, beginning of next year, we could welcome President Obama. I know that he is also interested in visiting another important South American country whose president, a lady, will have to leave office by the beginning of next year. So our expectation is that he'll come before she leaves, which should be in March.
Brazil was recently thrust into the midst of a debate in which it had been involved from the sidelines when President Manuel Zelaya of Honduras showed up on the doorstep of your embassy in Tegucigalpa and knocked. And this, if rumors are true about your next assignment, this will be something which you will, one of the issues that will fall into your lap. What can you tell us today about developments down there and about, frankly, about the role that Brazil is playing as the accidental host for these negotiations?
Well, I think today we can speak of encouraging developments in the efforts brokered under the auspices of OAS Secretary General José Miguel Insulza. Our ambassador to the OAS was in Tegucigalpa a few days ago with a few other ministers from the region, and they established what is called in Spanish a mesa de diálogo, a framework for dialogue between the three representatives from President Zelaya's team and three representatives from the de facto regime. And these discussions apparently have progressed quite well. We are still to see an agreement between the two sides that will allow for President Zelaya to be reinstated. And this is something that resolutions from the OAS and the General Assembly of the United Nations have called for, unanimously adopted resolutions. So there's no doubt where the international community stands on this issue. The fact that Brazil was brought into the spotlight somehow through President Zelaya's choice of shelter in Tegucigalpa, I think was rather fortuitous. I think he had initially intended to go to the UNDP office, the United Nations office in Tegucigalpa, and as that was not possible, well, there were exchanges of phone calls, and very quickly Brazil decided to accept. But I think this is what any democratically inclined country in the Americas would have done. It puts us in a position where I don't think we have to enhance our role otherwise, and perhaps what we should do is actually play a more subdued role diplomatically speaking. This is not to say that we're not very active through the OAS and through other channels and in discussions with the United States. We've kept in very close contact with the U.S. Embassy in Honduras, and I'd like to say a word of appreciation for Ambassador Lawrence's performance there, and as well as the engagement of the State Department and others in ensuring that we can overcome, this big challenge. It's a challenge to democracy in the Americas at a moment when this is probably the most democratic region in the world. I mean, especially if you look at the developing world, no other region has such a almost unanimity in favor of democracy and democratically elected leaders. So we'd like to keep it that way. We don't want to go back to the very painful experiences of some of the past decades, which Brazil, among others, had to go through.
I have some more questions for you, but why don't we go ahead and open it to the audience and get everyone involved. Ken, we've got a microphone. If you can wait for the microphone and let us know who you are and what your affiliation is.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Is this on? Okay. My name is Ken Levinson. I'm with AstraZeneca, pharmaceutical company. I preface this question slightly. I was just in Barcelona in August. First time I'd been there in 25 years. Last time I was there, 1984. And the changes there were extraordinary. It was a wonderfully exciting and vibrant city 25 years ago, but the development that's happened is just extraordinary. And you can track a lot of things to their Olympics in '92 and joining the EU in '86. So I'm wondering, is that a model you're looking to some extent? Because Rio really in that regard, it's an exciting and vibrant city, but there's a chance, there's this opportunity with the World Cup and the Olympics. What can be done between now and then to capitalize on that opportunity to really take this big leap forward for Rio? Is it a trade round? Is it something else? Because obviously the EU led to incredible investment for Spain, but I'm trying to think of what can we do maybe to be helpful to that?
Well, what can you do? I can tell you that there are a number of American companies that are already very interested in this, some of them that are involved in the London Olympics preparatory work, for example, and that have already set up offices in Rio. So, obviously it's a big opportunity for Rio. Rio, in some ways, has been trying to redefine its role in Brazil since the capital moved to Brasilia, and next year we're going to celebrate 50 years, half a century, since Brasilia has been Brazil's capital. Rio went through particularly difficult times during the 80s and 90s with urban violence becoming a big issue. The housing problem in Rio with the shanty towns is a big challenge. But otherwise, I think one of the most spectacular cities in the world and also a very vibrant society, a very creative city. And what is positive about Rio today is also, I think, worth mentioning here, the fact that you have a very good political equation. You have an excellent mayor with a very competent governor, and both work very effectively with the federal government. I might say that President Lula has actually exercised or put into practice what he often preaches. He defines himself as a man of dialogue, a man of negotiation, and he has demonstrated by his relationship with governors of all political colors that he can work effectively with people from his own party, from people from the opposition, etc. And in the case of Rio, this has been very important in trying to crack down on crime, on drug trafficking, and trying to deal with some of the big challenges of the city. In some respects, the government had already anticipated the decision by approving a kind of stimulus package, really what we call the Growth Acceleration Plan, that was adopted right at the beginning of President Lula's second term. And that included big investments in infrastructure and urban development in major cities, including in Rio. Then with the decision for the World Cup and now with the Olympic Games, of course, I think these programs have to be looked at under another light. But certainly Barcelona, I think, is one of the models that we are looking at. I happen to know Barcelona rather well because my mother-in-law comes from Barcelona, and I've traveled there frequently. And I could see how the Spaniards and the Catalanes turned the opportunity provided by Olympic Games into really an extraordinary leverage for urban development and reviving the city. So this is one model, but also I think one has to realize that, well, Brazil is a developing country with different challenges, and we will have to look at solutions that are very much, let's say, custom tailored to our own needs. Another initiative that I might refer to is the big housing development plan that was announced this year, in fact, and that will be responsible for the construction of 1 million new houses for the poorest segment of the population in Brazil, and this will also greatly benefit Rio. So we're looking here at a situation where you could, in fact, envisage a Rio in 10 or 20 years that will no longer be known for its shanty towns or for its crime rate, and where everyone will be able to enjoy, well, the beauty that the city has to offer and its cultural vibrancy.
As a follow-up on that, Ambassador, all those infrastructure projects you've just mentioned, are they open for American participation?
Yes, they are. And in fact, we've been a little bit frustrated that the United States has not taken a greater interest, for example, in the Growth Acceleration Plan. Spain has been very active in some of the modernization of the road network in Brazil. We have managed to get American companies interested in the dredging that the plan includes for many of the seaports in Brazil. So yes, absolutely. There are opportunities, and I know that there are some companies already looking at specific projects.
Good. That sounds like a good invitation.
Yeah.
Yes, sir, in the front row. And the microphone's coming right to you.
Two questions. First is, recent reports indicate that Latin America could be on the verge of a major arms race, with a number of countries, including Brazil, seeking to replace obsolete equipment with modernizing their militaries. What are the opportunities here for U.S. companies in the scheme of things, and what are the pitfalls? My second question is that about a month ago, Venezuela's president, Hugo Chavez, hosted a number of African leaders on Isla Margarita for a summit. One of them was Muammar Gaddafi of Libya. Not long ago, Lula attended the African Union Summit in Tripoli. And I'm just wondering, given Gaddafi's own controversial background, what are your thoughts on this rapidly growing Brazilian investment in Libya and Gaddafi's efforts to expand Libya's own business ties throughout Latin America and the Caribbean?
Right. Well, maybe just start with the second question. The summit at Isla Margarita was actually the second summit of an initiative that was launched by Brazil, which is the South American-African Summit. The first summit took place in Nigeria, and this time it fell upon a South American country to host it, so Venezuela offered. And all the African Union members were invited, as well as all the South American countries. So it is basically a framework for enhancing trade and development among the two regions, and looking at business opportunities, looking at ways in which we can strengthen our economies and our societies. Relations with Libya are not among the strongest we have with African countries. There are a number of Brazilian companies in Libya. Odebrecht, I think, is one of them that is building quite a bit of housing there, but not something that would be on a different scale from, let's say, many of the European countries that have been investing in Libya recently, and certainly much less than Italian investment in Libya, which we know is very, very strong. So I think this is more or less a kind of relationship that you would not find anything special out of the ordinary. And I might add that there's another similar summit that's been taking place at 3-year intervals that brings together South America and the members of the Arab League. So Libya will also participate in those because it cuts across the entire northern African landscape and up to the Gulf states. Qatar hosted the second edition of that summit earlier this year. And again, it's been a very peace-oriented initiative where the countries involved look at possibilities for investment, trade, and as well as some coordination on political affairs. But taking into consideration that the variety of point of views here make it difficult to have very specific common platforms. Now, on the military situation in South America, I think it's fair to start by saying that South America is one of the least armed regions of the world. And there has been some lagging frustration among the Brazilian military with the, small percentage of the budget that they get for modernizing and for updating their capacity. Brazil is a very large country, as you know, as large as the United States if one excludes Alaska, but with a larger number of neighbors. We have 10 neighbors and borders that, if we don't police them correctly, if we don't create the kind of capacity necessary, could very quickly turn into avenues for crime, for drug trafficking, et cetera. So there's a sense that we need to, rise to the responsibility of defending a large territory such as Brazil's. There's some concern also that with the new oil finds, we need a better navy. So I would describe what is going on in South America today not as an arms race, but more as an effort at modernization of the military capacity. And to the extent that many of the economies are doing better than in the past, or there have been several years of economic growth, if you compare it with a lost decade of the 1980s or the performance of the 90s, I think it's natural that when countries are doing a bit better, they might look at some areas that would not be a priority if you're going through an economic downturn. And in fact, I might remind the audience here that President Lula, when he took office and he established his priorities, of course, placing great emphasis on the need for combating hunger and poverty and improving social indicators in Brazil, he postponed a decision that was placed before him in 2003 for the acquisition of fighter jets. He said, no, I cannot start my government by spending on a new fleet of fighter jets. Once I start reaping some results on the social front, then we will look at that. Well, this is what he's doing. He did manage to produce some very impressive results on the social front, and so it's natural that 1 year before he leaves office, he should look at the modernization of the armed forces.
We have time for perhaps one or two more questions. Ana Barón, and then we'll come to this gentleman here.
Ana Barón, Clement. I just wanted to know how far is Brazil from decided if they're going to buy French or U.S. fighters, and which would you think would be the impact if they decide for the French? And second is, what is the meaning of the visit? I think it's the number 2 of the Iranian government that is coming to Brazil in November. So that also I want to know.
Well, I don't think I can provide you with too many more details than are already in the press on the fighter jet decision. The decision hasn't been taken yet. The 3 finalists are Sweden, United States, and France. And as you're probably aware, when the president of France, Sarkozy, came to Brazil for the Brazilian National Day, actually 7th of September, it seemed, the indications were that the French product had an advantageous position, if I can put it that way. But I wouldn't elaborate anymore because I know that the final decision hasn't been taken and none of the competitors have been outruled. So.
Are we far from the decision? Or?
No, I think we're quite close to a final decision. Yeah, it should come in the next weeks or so, before the end of the year. And I would say, yeah, I don't have a specific date, but I think we're very close to coming to a decision. And the other question was on? With Iran, yes. Well, President Lula met with President Ahmadinejad on the margins of the United Nations General Assembly. Now, a meeting between 2 leaders, 2 countries that have diplomatic relations, doesn't mean endorsement of that leader's policies necessarily. And in this case, I can assure you that during the discussions, there were many areas of disagreement. But there is indeed a visit that is being planned, not by the number two, but by the president himself. Ahmadinejad will be traveling, I think, on the 23rd of November to Brazil. I may add that as ambassador to the United States, I've kept in touch with a number of interlocutors here in Washington on these discussions that we've had with Iran, including Dennis Ross and people at the State Department, Undersecretary Bill Burns and others. When President Lula met with President Obama in Pittsburgh at the G20, I participated in a brief exchange they had before they sat down to talk about economic issues. Iran came up, and President Obama essentially said that he thought it was positive that leaders such as Lula did engage with the president of Iran. In particular, I think we have extraordinary credentials when it comes to the peaceful use of nuclear energy through our commitment through our Constitution to develop nuclear energy exclusively for peaceful purposes, and our agreements with Argentina, where there had been rivalry up to the 80s between the two countries in this field, and then we established a safeguards mechanism with the involvement of the International Agency for Atomic Energy in Vienna. So on that front, we can speak with some authority. And also on the human rights and on the relationship between Muslims and Jews. There's very peaceful, harmonious coexistence within Brazilian society, and we enjoy very close relations with Israel and the Arab world. In fact, we are also receiving the visit of the President of Israel in November this year, Shimon Peres. The Foreign Minister, Avigdor Lieberman, was in Brasilia a few months ago, and President Lula is planning to visit Israel next year.
Our last question. Yes, sir.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Dan Logue with the Capital Formation Institute. Thank you very much for your comments. Very, very informative today. I've talked with some researchers from Brazil, and they tell me that Brazil puts a lot of money into their science and technology research throughout all the university system. And I'm interested in what kind of initiatives that Brazil is pursuing to convert those very, very innovative ideas and all the new science and technology, all the research results, into some type of global participation in the innovation marketplace.
Well, I think this is one field where we have a lot to learn from the United States, frankly. And although, indeed, we have been investing more in science and technology, and in terms of the production of studies, for example, we have risen from, let's say, I don't know what exactly would be the position where we are today, but I read recently that we surpassed countries such as Sweden and other developed European countries in studies and research, etc. Where we are not as efficient as some others is in transforming scientific knowledge into economic development or into products. So this is an area where we are intensifying our cooperation with the United States. This month, the Bilateral Scientific and Technological Commission between Brazil and the U.S. will be meeting. It hasn't met in many years, I think in 3 or 4 years, so it'll be an important meeting with an ambitious agenda. Well, some of the areas where I think we are very strong, for example, is biology and biotechnology. The entire biofuels revolution in Brazil wouldn't have been possible without the many advances in science and technology that have been made in this area, including in the biodiesel front also, and looking at some of the feedstocks that grow in tropical countries. Brazil's performance in agriculture also wouldn't have been possible with the advances made through institutions such as Embrapa, which is today maybe one of the premier international institutions for looking at new seeds and new agricultural techniques for tropical climates. And Embrapa has been establishing offices in other parts of the world, in Ghana, Africa, for example, in trying to share some of these developments in techniques with other countries. So many of the areas where we are at the forefront have to do with energy, agriculture, or specific circumstances. Maybe this is where we can show some comparative comparative advantage. But also on the information technology front, I think Brazil is one of the most connected societies to the internet on a per capita basis. Certainly among the BRICS, we would be at the forefront of that. And this has attracted quite a bit of investment and also made possible some new opportunities for cooperation with the United States.
Well, Ambassador, with those thoughtful remarks, I think you've helped prove the point I made in the introduction about both the qualities of the Brazilian Foreign Service and about your own qualities. As to your upcoming responsibilities, Godspeed, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.